Hotep, Black Power. Right now, listening to excerpt from Dr. King. As you know, 50 years ago yesterday was the anniversary of his assassination and ascension. So, there's a lot of things that you may not know about Dr. King, but you will know a little something today. One thing I wanted to say is that for a long time, you know, I underestimated and I didn't give Dr. King the credit that he rightfully deserved. Because no matter if we agree or disagree with Dr. King, you know, he took 2 bullets to the dome for our people. We must give him much credit for that. Because we can talk a good game, you know, but how many of us will do that? You know, how many of us have done that? How many of us are willing to do that? You know, those of us who are caught up in the glamour and glitz of life, who wants to enjoy the finer things in life. But if you look back on the 1960s, where it weren't no cell phones, no technology, almost was non-existent. The highest form of technology was partially colored TV. And the work that our ancestors had to put in to try to bring liberation and salvation and justice and equality to people of color, such as you and I. And so, you know, this is easy to sit back and to criticize, you know, people, in which we are experts at doing, you know, but when it comes to really putting in some work, you know, we seem to come up with 1,000 excuses or reasons not to. Because of the fact that even from 1968 to 2018, the self-hatred, the level of self-hatred has risen at least 1,000% higher. And Dr. King talked about everything. Because a lot of us have a misconception that he had this overwhelming love for whites and was a dying integrationalist. That's the Old Testament Dr. King. Now you have the New Testament Dr. King, where he came to his senses and realized that the words out of his own mouth saying that the "I had a dream" speech was a nightmare. That he put his people, he believed he put his people in the burning house called integration. And that segregation was most prosperous for the black nation when we were separate from our oppressor. When we integrated and locked in with our oppressor, based on the fact that the so-called white imposter Jew tricked us, because we get it, we are also confused about when you see Dr. King and Ralph Abernathy and others locking arms with these so-called white Jews and these Catholic preachers, that he had this overwhelming love for the European, which was false. The so-called white Jew was discriminated against as well by white supremacists, by the Klan, and they locked arms with us because that was the one thing at that particular time that they had in common with us, is that they were discriminated and hated against. And as you can see years later, once they got the relief, the freedom, and the reparations, they left us hanging high and dry. And not even that, even more so, they're the ones who are our oppressors today. So, you know, Dr. King, what really got him assassinated was when he talked about the war in Vietnam, when he talked about poverty, going in brothers and sisters' houses where, you know, they were suffering with rats and roaches, children being bit by rats, children not eating in the South, you know, povertized situations, because the Emancipation Proclamation left our ancestors just literally walking around with no resources. And so a lot of our ancestors, primarily the females, had to go back to the plantation and prostitute themselves to their oppressors so that the family could eat. You know, and it's somewhat like that today, but just in a different form, because nothing is new under the sun, and history always repeats itself. And so if you get the book, which I always had recommended that you all get, Orders to Kill, which gives a blow-by-blow description of everything that took place in Dr. King's life, all the way up to the assassination and beyond. And this is written by Dr. William Pepper, who was Dr. King's lawyer. And I just want to read an excerpt from you to let you know how certain people were complicit in Dr. King's in his assassination. In 1968, Ernestine Campbell and her husband owned the Trumpet Hotel, which abutted the Lorraine. No one had ever talked to her or asked her about what she saw on that fateful afternoon. Excuse me. Ernestine said she left the hotel and started for home just before 6 p.m. During the driving her gold bronze Cadillac up Butler and turning right on Mulberry, as she passed the Lorraine driveway on Butler, she saw Dr. King standing on the balcony. She didn't hear anything because she had the car windows up and the radio on. As she turned the corner onto Mulberry, she looked up and saw Dr. King on the balcony. She thought he had a heart attack. She stopped for a minute or two at the driveway, wondering why people weren't racing to the balcony. Possibly she had arrived at the driveway when everyone was still in a state of shock. Her attention was in particular drawn to Jesse Jackson, who she said had one foot on the first step of the stairwell looking up to the balcony while bent over, putting something into a suit bag. Her pause was brief, and she drove on without seeing any policemen or really noticing anyone at all. Meaning that, actually, and the reason being because it was said that Jesse was complicit in Dr. King's assassination. And that excerpt from this white lady kind of confirms that Jesse was in the courtyard, when Dr. King came on the balcony. Because it's no secret that Jesse and Martin were beefing. Jesse Jackson and this other nigga named James Bevel would run Dr. King out of meetings. Dr. King would be using profanity, and Andrew Young said himself that he never seen anyone Martin hated as much as he did Jesse. He said he didn't trust Jesse. He was an opportunist. He thought he was an agent. And so Dr. King and Jesse got to beefing over wearing a tie to dinner over at Billy Kyle's house, who stated himself he moved out of the way so that the assailants could get a clear shot at King, because he was complicit in the assassination as well. He was a Memphis informant who walked with Dr. King, and they were going over Billy Kyle's house to eat. And so the argument between King and Jackson was about the necktie. And King stated that you can't go to dinner without a tie. But when Dr. King came out at 6 o'clock on the balcony, Jesse was in the courtyard. Dr. King had a change of heart and just told Jesse that you don't have to wear a necktie to dinner. And Jesse replied by stating that, yeah, you're right, because all you need to go to dinner with is the appetite. And that's when the shots rang out. So, and the fake pointing, as you can see, that was just a fake pointing, because how could they point? And the ladies, if you see the lady, the cleaning lady, right there, what was she doing still cleaning rooms at 6 o'clock? She was supposed to have been away from off the premises and off work. And it was later that we found out that she was given $1,000 every Christmas anonymously until she passed away. So that's that's very interesting. And how could they point one way when, if the bullet came from the opposite way that they're pointing? How could they all hear the bullet? How could they all know where it came from? The only one that was that had King's back was Ralph Abernathy, and Dr. King made that clear. He made that clear. And what happened was, when they weren't supposed to be in the Lorraine Motel anyway. But when they first got to the Lorraine Motel, they had the bottom floor. And what happened, the FBI and federal agents and the government moved King up to room 306, where they were able to get a clear shot at King. So very interesting, very interesting. And now that there have been a lot of photos and a lot of information and tape recordings from the FBI, wiretap recordings from the FBI has been made public domain. Because at first in '68 they said that it would be a 50-year hold on all of these tapes and photos. As you can see, this is one of the new photos of King going up the steps. And as a result, Coretta Scott was that's a picture of Coretta Scott lying in state. And as you know, she carried the torch for Dr. King until she passed away. She held on and became a conspiracy theorist. She realized James Earl Ray was not the shooter, that he was just a patsy, and in which he died from liver cancer in prison. But the King family visited him often. I think twice a month. They made sure he had money on his books for to buy canteen and supplies and everything while he was in prison. You know, the commissary money and whatnot. And they knew that he was not the killer. And no one believed Coretta Scott King. She was always brushed off and looked at as being a conspiracy theorist, that she lost her mind since the passing of her husband. You know how this Illuminati, how they play people, and portray that they're under MK Ultra, which Coretta Scott King wasn't. You know, and also their other daughter, the other daughter had passed. To be honest, I don't know the exact cause of death was, but she passed on at an early age. She had some medical issues coming up, and that really hurt Coretta, because she left before Coretta. You know, as Dr. King lie and state, and I must say, Dr. King, you know, based on the fact of how those shots, you know, almost ripped his face in two, he was put together very well. And a lot of people had heart attacks. A lot of people had nervous breakdowns. Several cities went up in flames, including Washington, D.C., because of the impact that Dr. King had on the black nation. Malcolm X was not as known as Dr. King. He was known, but not as worldwide as Dr. King. By Dr. King winning the Nobel Peace Prize. You know, his stands for nonviolence, which he protracted that at the end, because he met with Malcolm and Elijah. And a lot of people don't know that, you know, because they wanted to look at it as the militant and the moderate. But Dr. King was militant too, especially towards the end of his stay. He was really, really, really a true revolutionary. And he was just tired of the bullshit. And so that's when he was returning to Washington. They stopped in Memphis to speak against the trash workers that was on strike in Memphis. But they were on their way to Washington, and they were not going to leave Washington until there would have been a redistribution of the wealth, that there would have been not one poor, hungry child on the planet. And he met with this big-eared, wide-neck, camel breath honky from Texas, LBJ, who was complicit in John F. Kennedy's assassination when he signed the Civil Rights Act, the Civil Wrongs Act of 1964, and which really didn't do nothing, because if you look at it now, the black community, especially the black man, his civil rights are violated basically on live television. He's executed through police terrorism and among an array of other things. You know, so the Civil Rights Act really wasn't nothing. The Voting Rights Act, you know, which gave us permission to vote for which devil that we wanted to vote for. Which slave master, you had your choice of which whip you wanted to get hit with. And that's all the Voting Rights Act added up to. You know, so, you know, Dr. King, you know, we have to give him much credit. He was a powerful, powerful brother. College graduate at age 15. Although he was boule, And however, early on, you know, like I said, I deal with New Testament Dr. King, who had become a straight up revolutionary who spoke against the war, who wanted to end poverty and homelessness and unemployment in the black community, who dealt with so much death threats and met his demise even at the hands and the assistance of those around him, those that portrayed to be close to him, you know. And that was one of the most heart-wrenching situations that Coretta Scott King, Sister Coretta, Mother Coretta had to deal with. That all those people that broke bread claiming to be Dr. King's friend and brother and comrade and, you know, rider to the end, were all collaborators with the enemy, with the exception of Ralph Abernathy, who was supposed to make that speech the night before at the Masonic Temple in Memphis, that Dr. King claimed to have had a cold, wasn't feeling well, and he wanted Ralph Abernathy to go ahead and make the speech. But Ralph went back and had word sent back to Dr. King that the people wanted to see him. And a couple of years later, on NBC's Meet the Press, Jesse Jackson went on national television and outright lied and said that Dr. King wanted him to go and make that speech. And he told Dr. King that they wanted to see him. He outright lied. He also, Dr. King, they also had made an agreement that they were not going to stay in the courtyard after the strike and talk to the press. But when Dr. King was shot, right after he was shot, Jesse did not ride with the ambulance where all the other guys rode to the hospital. Jesse stayed back and talked to the press and portrayed like he needed a ride. But why didn't you go when everybody else went and the rides were available? Finally, everything was closed when Dr. King got shot. Everything was shut down. All the train stations, all the bus stations, the airports, all terminals, everything was shut down. It was only one plane that was allowed to leave out of Memphis the night King was shot. And that was the FBI. And Jesse Jackson left out of Memphis that night. So when you ever see him, ask him how did he get out of Memphis the night of the King assassination, when nobody else could get out with the exception of the FBI. How did he get out of Memphis? And I say these things, brothers and sisters, so we can understand our leaders more better. This was a true leader. This is what you call a true leader. You know, no buck dancing, you know, none of that. No bootlicking, no buck dancing, no behind the scenes collaboration with the oppressor. Everything was in the open with Dr. King. If you listen to some of his speeches, not the I Had a Dream speech, which whites want you to listen to so you can soften your heart up and accept being oppressed by white supremacy even more and more each day. But listen to some of his real revolutionary, radical, serious speeches that made total sense. And Dr. King realized that. He came to the understanding that his children would not hold hands and lock hands and be on some mountaintop with the oppressor's children and live happily ever after. He came to his senses. And so we need to be clear about those things, because that's the reason why white America loves Dr. King, because he was nonviolent. See, as long as you have a nonviolent approach, like protesting and walking up and down the street singing, the "We Shall Overcome," everything was okay then, because you were not a threat. But when you have the eye for an eye mentality, then it becomes a problem to white supremacy. And finally, the children of Dr. King, who are very disappointing, who to this day still fight, literally fight, to sell his Nobel Peace Prize, his personalized Bible, and other writings and excerpts from their father. Because they're more interested in getting paid and living a lavish lifestyle, opposed to upholding the legacy of their father. So, it's just something, to think about. I hope that you got something out of this. I'll be coming back with another video. I'm going to be talking about the false imprisonment of Meek Mill and Stephon Clark and others that have lost their lives in the hands of police terrorism. So until then, Hotep, peace, Black Power. Consensus, but a mold of consensus.